Race 1 of 2024 has been completed, and it was an untroubled race for Max Verstappen, who drove away from the competition leading a Red Bull 1-2 on the 20th edition of the Bahrain race. Behind him, though, there was plenty of action and plenty of teething issues for a number of teams. But when it was all said and done, it was Carlos Sainz who joined Max and Sergio on the podium after an enthralling battle with his teammate. Well, I'm Bryn Lucas, and joining me to discuss all that we saw in Bahrain, over in Bahrain, is John Noble, and here back in the UK is Matt Q. First of all, welcome to you both. Let's kick things off, shall we, with Red Bull then, and maybe some of the things we all feared could have happened after testing came to fruition, really, with a very, very dominant performance, maybe arguably better than we were expecting if they'd stayed with the RB19, last year's car. What do you both make of the performance, not just from Max, but from Sergio as well? John, let's start with you out there in Bahrain.
I think Toto Wolff summed it up best tonight. We asked him about, what he made of it. They were quite optimistic. I spoke to Toto last night after qualifying. They were quite bullish about where they are. They said they'd wound down. The qualifying performance had focused better on the race, so it's all looked close. And then today, he said Red Bull weren't in a different league, they're in a different galaxy. So, and I think that's the general feeling in the paddock. That RB20 is fantastic, same characteristics as last year. It may not have a massive advantage in qualifying over the rest of the field, but in terms of race pace, consistency, tyre degradation, Max Verstappen being completely at one in the car, it's a step above everything else. And I think you'd be quite a brave person tonight to be betting against Red Bull winning every race this year.
I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head there, John, haven't you?
Thanks,
just by
Matt.
sort of no worries. But when you're saying sort of about Verstappen being at one with the car, it's two sides of the story, because before the Ferrari brake issues, before Mercedes engine troubles, there were just a few times the camera would sort of cut, and you had Russell, the two Ferraris, and Perez in this really nice four-car train early on. You think, if you take away Verstappen, and this is it, this is brilliant. But the headlines are always generated by the winner, so Verstappen being dominant, exceptional performance from him in an exceptional car, but the stakes are always lower on those lesser battles. I think sort of bigger picture is probably what F1 didn't really want, a quite unspectacular race just generically, for boosting audience numbers after shaky Drive to Survive figures and all that. But also there's been a lot of distractions with the Christian Horner stuff and everything in the lead up to the season, so they could have probably done with a mega sort of Bahrain dual 2-3-way fight for the lead, a few more, bit more jeopardy, a few safety cars as a nice glossy distraction. But instead we got sort of 2023 part 2.
Well, looking at Max, what was it? I think when Sergio came in for his when the second pit stop happened, there was around about 5-second gap between them, and he finished 22 seconds ahead of his teammate. So we talk about Max and how scary he is there. It is like he's wearing the car, and he was born with that car, on his skin. It's unbelievably scary, his dominance. And as John, you're saying that you wouldn't write him off winning every single Grand Prix of 2024. Do you seriously think that could happen?
I think it could happen. I think a lot. They'll still come down to races where there's a bit of luck, and I think like last year, there were a few times where things could have gone wrong for Red Bull, like tiny elements of luck in a race, and they all went Max and Red Bull's way. You think of Monaco, for example, Fernando's pit stop. Chose the wrong tyre in a split second. Little events like that could happen. So it's still a tough task to do it. It's still a massive delivery to go for those 24 races. But the scale of the advantage I think that car has at the moment, it's hard to see rivals being able to close that up over the course of the season. I think they'll close the gap down, but there's little reason to feel that Ferrari are going to make the steps they need to get on terms with Max. Mercedes need to make a huge jump as well. So no one's resigned. No one says it's definitely a done deal, but I think the scale of the kind of the ease at which Max pulled it off today, he wasn't really pushing. I think we only saw a glimmer of the potential when he smashed that fastest lap on that final stint on the softs, clear of absolutely everybody. So just a different league. The key thing is if Perez can run in clear air at the front and not wear his tyres a bit more in traffic and have to come through, what potential can he match on the kind of tracks and venues that favour him a little bit more? So hopefully we'll get some battles, because we don't want races where one driver's just clear in front and disappearing. We want at least a fight between teammates.
And let's stay with that then. Matt, Sergio Perez, how will he be looking back at his performance today? I mean, he finished second, so he climbed up a decent 3 positions to finish second, but will he be pleased with the fact he's got himself on the podium finishing second, or will he be disappointed by the gap between him and Max, albeit they both had very different jobs to do through the Grand Prix itself?
I think he'll be pleased on 2 fronts. Okay, you never want to finish behind your teammate, but he's overturned, a below expectation qualifying performance and, achieved a Red Bull 1-2. If he gets second place in every Grand Prix this season, there won't be, albeit he's out of contract at the end of the year, but there won't be questions about whether he deserves to be sacked midway through because he's doing the expectation. So he's passing the internal benchmark there. And I think sort of just both of their analysis, their reactions at the end of the race. Verstappen said everything's perfect. I'm at 1 with this car, better than expectations. And Perez actually had a couple of complaints about, sliding across all the different Pirelli compounds, that he had an engine braking issue. So he'll think, okay, Verstappen's 22 seconds ahead, but I've had to come from 5th in the grid and managing problems while he's had the perfect day. So maybe if there's a swing in my favour, actually I can be a lot closer than that to give sort of him something to worry about. So I reckon on those metrics, he comes away sort of quite happy, if not elated, because obviously he's not a Grand Prix winner.
Mildly chipper, it might be. Mildly chipper. What about somebody who I don't think will be particularly happy, and that's Charles Leclerc? He was disappointed yesterday in quali because he actually had a very, very strong qualifying time in Q2. He actually had the best time of all in the entire sessions itself. So he missed out on a pole position. Then he had some issues in the race. John, what can you tell us that you understand has happened at Ferrari there?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of head scratching going on tonight. So, I mean, we saw Charles locking up quite early on in the race and kind of carried on, and the brake complaints kept coming through. It's basically different temperatures on either side of the car. I think it was a 50-degree temperature range across the two, which is basically means one side of the car is braking much more effectively than the other, so the car's pulling. I think it's something that Carlos Sainz had a brake problem on open day of practice. So I don't know if it's the same or something different, but there's obviously something deep inside the Ferrari system somewhere that hasn't quite worked correctly. I'm sure they get to the bottom of it. Bahrain can be a bit of a unique track in terms of the kind of braking demands, and a lot of tricky corners where you need to be very, very confident on the brakes. So I think Charles will be disappointed. I think there was quite high hopes that potentially that pace he showed on Saturday and good long runs, they could have been in that fight there with Max. That hasn't happened at all. But I think they'll be slightly encouraged that Sainz didn't finish a mile behind Perez, and that if they can build forward from here, maybe there's a sniff of challenging for seconds.
Well, let's stay with Ferrari then. I mean, challenging for second always sounds, oh, there you go. It's a horrible prize, isn't it? Challenging for second, but it's something they've got to go for. What about Carlos then, Matt? I mean, Carlos Sainz climbed up to third, finished third, got that final spot on the podium, overtook Leclerc twice in the race as well, which is a good marker to put down, albeit with Charles Leclerc having these problems.
Yeah, he was the main source of entertainment in the race for me. I think a bit like last year's Grand Prix where, so much of the sort of positive feeling towards that Grand Prix, I think, was based on Alonso's final stint where he came past Hamilton and I think, was it Sainz to get on the podium? I think that was sort of Sainz's role this year. He added that excitement, some robust moves on Leclerc, and hopefully, I really hope that's a taster of that narrative to come for the whole year, that I've got nothing to lose. Thanks a lot for Ferrari for packing my bags for me. So, no team player. I'm basically doing the best job I can to get the best possible seat I can. So I hope we see a lot of that from Sainz. But it does sort of mix in with the other themes, doesn't it? Sainz had a great drive, judged his overtaking well, did well in a sound Ferrari, but he was helped by Leclerc battling his own problems. The fact he was so close to Perez had his complaints. I know racing drivers' excuses, all of that. And also, was it lap 18 when he does that really nice round the outside of turn 4 move on George Russell? By which point the Mercedes is already having to sort of lift and coast because of it, the temperature spiking. So while Sainz is on track judgment in terms of wheel to wheel placement of the car was stellar, pretty much faultless. It's such a small sample size, isn't it, to say that a Ferrari is clear second or can really, put Perez in his place when everyone is going home tonight with their individual complaints, apart from Max Verstappen and apart from maybe Carlos. Well, I suppose Carlos might say he had bent steering, didn't he, after knocking Perez into turn one.
Staying with somebody who might have a bit of a vested interest, though, in Ferrari, and that is Lewis Hamilton. Now, he might be looking at what's going on just over the fence at the moment, but he's probably focused firmly on what's going on in his own garage at the moment as well, because he gained 2 positions. George Russell dropped 2 positions, but they both the Mercedes had issues pretty early on, as you were hinting, John.
Yeah, it was a strange one. We've had 3 days of testing here, and then 2 days of kind of practice qualifying. So you'd think teams would be quite on top with exactly all their settings, but for some reason, the race today, they basically started overheating. So whether it's a combination of kind of running in traffic, slightly warmer ambient temperatures, because the temperature's been a bit weird this weekend. Everyone's been wearing, as you can see, wearing jumpers, and people in coats in the paddock. You wouldn't expect that normally in Bahrain. So I suspect they got the cooling calculations slightly wrong for the demands today. So they were overheating. That means lift and coast, backing things off, getting in clear air. So basically derailed their race. They were losing about half a second per lap was Toto's estimate. So it's something that's quite easily solved for the next race. Nothing, not an inherent problem with the car. You just get your calculations better for Saudi. But I think they'll feel slightly disappointed with that, but obviously give some encouragement that there is more pace and more potential in that car.
Yeah, like John said, it's a mistake rather than the whole season's written off already. But it's a mistake that no other team made. No other team, apart from I suppose Williams, who had a similar powertrain cooling issue with the Mercedes engine, struggled with. And it's not a mistake sort of befitting of an 8-time constructors champion, is it? Getting your calculations wrong. It does feel a bit lame. I know it's a bit poor excuse. Quite entertaining that they've gone from 0 pods to conventional side pods for this year, and these are the ones that overheat. But that's by the by. But yeah, I suppose they want to obviously nip it in the bud straight away. Go to Saudi, similar region, similar climate, and not get it wrong. Yeah, so it's pretty like, I don't know. It seems pretty poor overall, but it was like a fine race for Mercedes up until that point. I'd say it's vanilla, isn't it? That was a vanilla ice cream, and other future races they'll want at least a few sprinkles or something on top. It's a platform to build on from now.
Matt's got a new food-based show coming out very soon, so watch this space. McLaren are just up the road from where I am, in fact, and they had another beige one, I suppose, as well, another vanilla one from them, I suppose you could really call it, because Lando gains a place, Oscar stays where he is. What do we think we learnt from them today, John?
Yeah, I think you've got this interesting dynamic in Formula 1 at the moment. We've obviously got Verstappen, I think, clear in front of you, just that car just suits him and everything's nailed. Perez is probably second, and then you've got this fascinating kind of Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, potentially Aston Martin. We're not sure if they're in no man's land or a part of that gap, but there's such tiny margins between them. So you've got to basically choose, are you going to go for qualifying setup to get grid position, or are you going to go race setup, maybe sacrifice your qualifying position, then you're kind of dumped into traffic. So I think there's a lot of head scratching going on at team trying to work out what's the best approach. I think McLaren didn't do as well as they should have done in qualifying yesterday. Potentially could have been up there much nearer the front, and I think if you can run near the front, then the pace is so much so even between the teams that you can probably maintain where you start as long as that basic consistency and the degradation is good. So I think they suffered from yesterday, and I think very, very difficult to come back because there isn't a huge delta between the teams. Everyone was pretty much on the same strategy today because the medium tyre was a useless race tyre. So you start on the soft and then it's pretty much two hards apart from Red Bull. So no strategy variation, not much variation between the cars, which I think is why today was quite boring because you don't have that kind of offset of pace between teams. So they'll go away, they'll rethink, they work out where do we need to target to qualify, and where's the best position to start that we can deliver the best result.
I think they call it processional, don't they, rather than boring. I think boring is the banned word when it comes to a broadcast side of things. But we'll paper over that one. We're going to keep that in, obviously. Of course we are. But Matt, let's talk about one other team, the team that rounded out the top 10, and that is Aston Martin. John just mentioned there, and Alonso fell backwards a bit. Stroll had a spin and managed to climb up a bit from the spin itself. So on paper you think, it actually wasn't so bad. But I'm not sure how happy they'll be with the fact they walk away with 9th and 10th.
Yeah, to sort of pick up from what John said, I think, as we've sort of said throughout pre-season testing and speaking to team sort of tech personnel, this will be a season where, cars will fall out of their very narrow operating window. So there will be swings in performance. So potentially Aston Martin has just had a slightly off weekend. But, compared to them being that uber success story at the start of last season, this will feel like a disappointment. And okay, they got lost basically with their upgrade stream throughout last year, but they were taking parts that they'd discovered for the 2024 car and reverse engineering to fit the AMR 23, and they fell off course. But they sort of arrested that, they turned it around, and they were satisfied with where they ended the year, strong drives Brazil thereafter. So I think you'd be more wanting them to pick up from that. Whereas this does feel like, they have regressed. And okay, in that order, compared to 2 years ago, you've not got Alpine in there quite up, they're right down at the bottom. And compared to at the start of last year, you've now had to make room for McLaren. So it's not a catastrophe. It's just that someone else is slotted in above them. But yeah, Alonso was on the podium here last year. He was on the podium at the next race again, in Saudi Arabia this time last year. So this will be like an anonymous 9th, 10th will be disappointing for him. But on the flip side is that, if Alonso's not making headlines with his on-track performances, I'm sure he'll come up with some good things to say to make sure he's still getting every inch of sort of real estate in newspapers, magazines, on our website. So I look forward to what he has to say next about it being the greatest ever drive for 9th place.
John gives a little laugh as well to that point. But John, as you're out there, talk us through what you think about DRS. The rules changed this season where DRS comes in after one lap. Did it work? I think it worked for Max, didn't it? But did it work for everyone else? What's the general consensus?
It's quite interesting because Max basically, when the guys died, Vettel was the classic of this, that knew what the DRS advantage he needed to get to break it and had 2 laps to do it and would often do it. So I think now you can have quite frantic first laps for the leader to try to break clear. I think today wasn't a good judge. It's a difficult kind of race because it's Bahrain's a unique track surface, very rough, high degradation. It's hot. Cars can't particularly follow very well here because you tyre start overheating. So I think all those factors were what delivered a quite processional race because there was none of that kind of tyre offset. Processional, not boring. Is that all right? So I think it's too early to judge on that, but I think potentially it could be more interesting having this DRS available after the first lap because I think it'll stop leaders breaking away and will keep the pack closer. And the key thing potentially is if Ferrari can, find a bit of pace to qualify at the front, get Max, back into the pack, then potentially we might have a bit more of a race on our hands because I think Max in that car, if he's free coming out of turn 1, then see you later.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to disagree, but Matt, I'll give you the opportunity.
No. I mean, it was a bad test today because you didn't have a safety car to shake things up. I was sort of at the back of my head, there was perhaps a small thought that, part of Verstappen's crushing success is basically he never shocks the Pirellis, does he? He always leans into them, sort of gradually builds them up and then really sort of reaps the rewards at the end of the stint. So I was hoping that by, bringing DRS forward, he's got to absolutely nail it on the first lap, tear chunks out of them, and then he'll really be made to pay later on. But that didn't quite happen. So, yes, to be seen, I think, how it evolves with some good safety cars, a bit more jeopardy.
TBC ... And that's where we'll end this episode. Thank you very much, gents, to John over there in Bahrain, to Matt as well, from his home here in the UK, where nobody knows. We'll be back next time for Saudi Arabia. Not much of a break for the rest of the teams. They'll be heading off for a short hop, really, across the border for the next race next weekend. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can stay across all of the coverage. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.